Hello there! We continue with the Inkscape step-by-step tutorial series. We're getting closer to Halloween, so to start getting into the mood, we're gonna draw this jack-o'-lantern together. Like all videos in this series, we're gonna draw this entirely in Inkscape using keyboard and mouse, no tablet or sketch necessary. I'll be drawing in real time and step by step, and you will follow along and end up with a result that's very close to what you're seeing here. On the way, you'll learn a few tools and techniques that apply to this type of subject. If this video seems interesting to you, but you aren't familiar with Inkscape or vector illustration, I have a course on the channel that should be more than enough to follow this tutorial. Link in the description. Also, if you want to check the other step-by-step tutorials, link to the playlist in the description as well. Making this type of scripted videos takes a lot of time and effort, so I would highly appreciate it if you give me a like and comment to help with the algorithm. Also, I make weekly tutorials on Inkscape and illustration, so if you like more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications. Let's begin with the line art. Most creepy pumpkins will have these bumps on the surface, and I want to exaggerate that. So let's start by building the body from there. Grab the pen tool and make these C-shapes. Every C-shape should be made of 5 or so nodes. Use straight lines. They are faster to draw and much easier to control. Later on, we'll give them the curvature. Notice how they are overlapping a bit, especially at the corner. Try to variate them as much as you can. Don't make an exact copy. Variate the position of the nodes and the way they bend down. We want each of these bumps to be slightly different from each other. Place 3 on one side and then another 3 on the other side. We want the front to not be too busy for when we add the face. There is a bit of a gap here at the bottom and at the top, so make a smaller curve to close the spaces. Don't complete it. Leave them open like this. This doesn't look anything like a pumpkin, so select everything with the node tool and scale them with the arrows so it looks a bit more rounded. We don't actually want a pumpkin made of straight lines. We need to make the straight sections curved. But changing the node type will make each corner a bit too rounded. A better way to do this is to pull the handle out of each node. So if you hold shift and click and drag from a node with the node tool, you will pull the handle out in the direction of the cursor. Depending on the direction to where you drag, you will pull either the left or right side of the handle. If you want a full curvature, you'll need to drag the two handles from each node. And this will result in a much more controlled way to transform a straight section into a smooth one. Just pay attention to the shape the curve takes as you're pulling from the handle. Repeat the steps with all the nodes from all straight lines, and don't be afraid to adjust the handle position. Smooth nodes are always more complicated to move around, but if you don't move them too much, it's okay. Adjust all the nodes so it looks like a proper rounded pumpkin. Now for the stem, with the pen tool make this shape. With the node tool, bend the edges to make it look more natural. Some more refining. This part depends more on your own particular drawing and what looks good for it, and also what you like and dislike about it. So part of the illustration, it's up to you. One thing this pumpkin is missing here at the top are the bumps that should show on the opposite side. So with the pen tool, add two small ones, one on each side of the stem. And I think we are ready to give it some feel. Just select everything with the node tool and give it a random color from the palette, just to get to see the filled areas. Later on we'll give it the final colors. And the problem here is that we need to set the right stack order. I drew them without thinking about it, so it's better to give it color one by one and adjust the order as you go. The way you change the stack order is by using these buttons here at the tool controls of the object tool. But because we are gonna have to do this constantly, I'm gonna use shortcuts from now on, and I recommend you to do the same. To give colors to other shapes, you can sample from them. The default shortcut for the dropper tool is D. Adjust the correct order as you go sampling. Once you give all the shapes the color and you put them in the right order, it may happen that they don't fill the entire area of the pumpkin. That's okay. We can just use a shape made with the pen tool to fill the area. So draw the shape, give it the same color than everything else, and send it to be at the bottom of everything. And we have the pumpkin base. Once again, it's time for a bit of refinement. Just grab the node tool and adjust some stuff that you aren't 100% happy with. And here I want to show you a really cool path effect that can help you with this type of organic drawing. In case you don't know, path effects are non-destructive operations that you can perform on paths that will allow you to do unique things with them. What's better, some of them can be used with groups. The one we're gonna use now works with groups and it's gonna help us play with the shape of the pumpkin. First, we need to work on all paths that makes up the pumpkin. So with the object tool, select all shapes and hit Ctrl G to group them. Now open the Path Effect dialog by going to Path, Path Effects. To add a path effect, click on the black arrow. The one we want is called Envelope Deformation. The way this effect works is by having 4 lines at the top, bottom, left and right. The shape those paths will take will affect the shape of the pumpkin group. You need to first click on these buttons to be able to edit the path, and of course switch to the node tool. These lines work exactly like any other path in Inkscape. You can curve them with the node tool or the handles, and even add nodes, and this will change the shape of the pumpkin accordingly. I don't want to make too much changes with this effect. I prefer to go in and continue making some small changes with the node tool in the original shape. And as soon as you do this, you'll notice how the node seems to be off the strokes. This is because the path effect is showing the modified shape, but in reality, the original nodes are still in their original place. If you want to adjust the location of the nodes while still seeing the way the envelope effect modifies the shape, you're gonna have to deal with this. At least at any moment you can go back to the path effect dialog and keep playing with the effect. We're done with the line art of the pumpkin. Now let's make the carvings. Let's start with the eyes. Grab the pen tool and make these triangle shapes. These are the classic evil eyes from the jack-o'-lanterns. The nose is just a triangle. And the mouth is the most complex shape. I decided to keep it fairly simple though. Take a look. On the sides, it has this bit of a smirk. On the bottom, it has a couple of peaks that will read a bit like 2 fangs. If you don't like the shape of my mouth, you can draw your own. There is a lot of references of carvings out there. I'll give it another color so I can edit the shapes better. Now let's refine the face. Starting with the eyes, using the node tool, curve the border so the eye looks more natural. Repeat the same steps with the other eye. I want to make one of those carvings that have an iris built in, and the easiest way to do this is to use a Boolean operation to carve that section out. This is easy to do. Draw the iris shape on top of the eye shape. Here I made it a bit rectangular. I thought it looked better this way. And I'm gonna use a difference operation. Select the iris and the eye shapes, and then hit Ctrl and minus. The iris was wrested out of the eye, modifying the silhouette. Repeat the same steps with the other eye. Using this method, we could very easily add teeth to the mouth or other details. I'm not gonna do that, but it's a nice thing to try if you want to. One final detail. Notice how the facial shapes kinda feel like they're floating on the pumpkin. They don't feel like they're actually resting on the surface. The main reason is that the shapes conflict with the surface implied by the bumps we made. A nice little detail we can do here is to modify each face shape so it interacts with each bump. This is actually not hard at all. Grab the node tool and go to a line of a bump, double-click on the intersection to add a node, then double-click right next to it to add another node, and move it up along the line. This will make it look like the carving goes behind the bump. Repeat these steps with all the shapes that intersect with a bump line, which aren't that many. It's very important that you're happy with the location of each feature, because once you do this, you will not be able to make big changes, because then the change will not match with the bumps and it will look weird. And as you can see, this looks much better now. Now it really feels like the face was carved out of the surface of the pumpkin. And now for the final details to the features. Most jack-o'-lanterns show a bit of the plane in the cutout areas. This helps to add a lot of dimensionality, so you definitely want to do this. We're gonna use a difference operation to do that, but we will need to follow a bit of a process. Don't worry, it's not too complex. Go to one eye, duplicate it with Ctrl D, give it a random color, it doesn't matter which, it's just so we can see better. Now, without touching anything, duplicate it again, and again give it a random color different than the previous one. Select the last duplicate you made, and move it slightly up. Adjust it so the area that's showing below has the shape you want. You may need to adjust the iris shape so it shows completely. And also, the modifications we made to make it rest on the surface, we don't want them here on the inside, you can just delete those nodes. When you're done, shift select the other plane and perform the difference with Ctrl and minus. And that's it. You may want to give it a nice temporal color. Repeat the same steps with the other eye, duplicate, change color, duplicate again, change color, move it up and perform the difference. With the nose as well, though here I forgot to give it some curvature, and I'm adjusting with the node tool and then repeating the same steps to add the plane. And finally the mouth. And we are done with the drawing part of the jack-o'-lantern, though I might retouch some things later on, maybe with the envelope effect. For now, let's move to the color. Let's start with the basic colors. So it's easier to do this. Let's first group the shapes. This will be helpful to organize ourselves later, so we can quickly pick what we want. First, with the node tool, go one by one, shift selecting all the objects that makes up the body of the pumpkin. We do not want the facial features, only the body. Try not to forget anyone. Then hit Ctrl G and group it. Now for the face, so it's easier to pick the parts later on, group the two shapes that makes up the eye into one, and do the same for all the other features. When you're done, group them all into a single group. So now we have a group for the body and a group for the face. Open the Fill and Stroke dialog by going to Object, Fill and Stroke. When you apply a fill to a group, this will apply it to all objects from that group. So let's give it the main colors. From now on, to save up some time, I will go to the HSL color selection mode and show you the definitive color numbers. This will save you the pain of seeing me trying different colors for like an hour, and you will be able to copy my exact colors if you want to. Though, of course, you are welcome to try your own colors and experiment. Now the pumpkin has a single color, but the stem should be of a different one. Select it. Remember that you can bypass any group by using the node tool. It's quicker than entering the group and selecting the stem. Anyway, give it this color. Now for the eyes. We want to make a classic jack-o'-lantern with illumination coming from within, and I don't care for a smooth realistic rendering, but I do think some smoothness on the eyes will communicate better than the light is coming from the inside. So we will use a gradient. Pick the gradient tool. Make sure that the gradient type is set to lineal, and that the mode is set to the fill. Apply it to the eye by dragging in diagonal from the bottom up. Don't forget that we made a group, and you want the gradient to be applied only to the eye path. I'm telling you because gradients work with groups, so you may accidentally apply it to the two paths that makes up the eye group. For the first stop, the one that's closest to the center, I want this color, almost pure white. For the other stop, I want this color. Don't forget that gradients will make the last stop transparent, so don't forget to move the alpha slider all the way up. And I want a third stop in between to better smooth out the light. To make another stop in a gradient, first select the gradient tool, and then double click anywhere on the line. Now this new stop will be selected. Give it this color. Adjust the gradient so the last stop is barely visible at the corner. For the other eye, we don't need to repeat the same steps entirely. Just grab the gradient tool and draw the gradient on the path. You can reuse a gradient that you already made with this button over here in the Fill and Stroke dialog. Adjust it quickly if you need. The nose is too simple and small to need a gradient. We could just sample from the white. And now for the mouth. Because of the shape and the size it has, I feel an elliptical gradient will fit better. So in the tool controls, switch to the elliptical mode. Draw it on the surface and adjust its position. We already have all the colors, so you could just sample from the already existing ones. For the center node, the white. For the outer node, the dark orange. And then don't forget to add an extra node in between and sample from the yellow. Then adjust it. The depth planes in the features cannot be gray. Give it this color. And I don't like that this plane has a very noticeable stroke. I feel it distracts from the eye, so I'm gonna disable it with all the features. Continue applying the same color to the other ones by sampling, and also disabling the strokes. But here's the problem. Now the stroke width is being overlapped by the planes and looks weird. A quick solution is to duplicate the bottom shape with Ctrl D, and without touching anything, remove the fill. Now there is a stroke on top that looks nice and consistent all around. Repeat these steps with all the other face shapes. We are done with the main colors. Now let's add some light and shadow. I will go for a frontal illumination setup with the light coming in from the front. I think it would look nice with the creepy face and the rounded form. But for this next step, we have a bit of a problem. To make shadows, we want to be able to use Boolean operations with the individual bumps that makes up the pumpkin. This will save us from having to be careful with the shadow edges and save up a lot of time. But we cannot do that while we have a path effect applied. And if you remember, we have the envelope effect applied to the pumpkin group. This is easy to solve. We can apply the path effect. This will remove it and transform the shapes to the way they look with the path effect on. This is not ideal, not because we lose the path effect, we can always reapply it, but because when Inkscape transforms the original path to the new shapes, it will also mess up the original nodes, making it really hard to adjust the shapes if we want. So you usually want to avoid applying a path effect. In this case, the drawing is simple enough and the shape is definitive enough that we don't have any problem, but that's something you have to have in mind. Anyway, to apply a path effect, you need to select the shape and go to Path, Object to Path. And if you are successful, you should see that the path effect is gone, it's no longer showing on the path effect dialog, and now the shapes have nodes all in the wrong places. Okay, now let's make the shadow. Grab the pen tool and draw a shape on the border like this, and then complete it by overlapping entirely the other side. Try to make the shadow shape not match 100% with the shape of the curve of either bumps at the sides. This way it will look more natural. And of course I'm using straight lines that I will bend in a minute. But first, let's chop off the excess with a Boolean intersection. Duplicate the bump shape, where the shadow is supposed to rest, this one, and without moving anything, shift select the shadow and hit Ctrl and asterisk. The intersection operation will only keep the area where two shapes intersect. In this case, it will chop off all that area that was outside. Anyway, the shape should have the color of a shadow, so go to the Fill and Stroke dialog. Here we could give it an actual definitive color, but a nice technique you should keep in mind at the moment of making a shadow is to use a transparent shape. So pick a very dark blue color. We could also have used full black, but a dark blue looks a bit more colorful. And then move the A slider to somewhere between 20 and 30. If you remove the stroke, you should see how good this looks. And an extra nice benefit is that later on, if we want to adjust the color of the pumpkin, because the shadows are using a transparent color, they will still work perfectly with any other color. Continuing, send the shadow to be below the other bumps, and using the method we used at the beginning with the straight lines, smooth out the shapes and adjust it. For the next few shapes, I'm gonna follow the exact same process, making the shape and performing the intersection. But here comes another important tool to work efficiently. We can very quickly paste the color of the shadow, along with its transparency. This is very important because we cannot quickly set a color by sampling, because the dropper cannot sample transparency. Just select the shadow shape and hit Ctrl+C to copy it. Now it's copied to the clipboard. You could, if you wanted, to paste a copy of this shape using Ctrl and B, but we do not want to do that. Instead, select the other shape and hit Ctrl+Shift+B. This will give it the exact same color and transparency without changing its shape. From now on, I will be using this shortcut for all the other shadows. I will time-lapse the rest of this section because I follow the exact same process, making the shadow shape using the intersection operation to limit the shape to the bump it's in, applying the style using Ctrl+Shift+T, and then rounding off the straight corners. The only place where I did something different was in the front, where I just drew a shadow and I didn't need it to intersect it. For the shadow in the stem, with the pen tool follow the shape to one side, duplicate the stem and perform the intersection and paste the shadow. We are done with the shadow. Now I want to make some highlights here at the front where the light hits harder. With the pen tool, draw a shape in the center of the frontal area. Make sure it doesn't contact with the borders. Also, give it these spiky corners. These are supposed to follow other smaller bumps that run through the pumpkin, but that are too small to show any lines. These spikes also help to make the shape nicer to look at. Give it this color. Send it below the face. Now let's do the same thing we did with all the other shapes we made using straight lines. Grab the node tool and give it a curve using the method of holding shift while dragging from a node. The next bump should also have a highlight. This time we follow a process similar to the shadows. With the node tool, make a shape using straight lines. You can paste the style of the highlight if you want. Copy the highlight and then select the other shape and hit Ctrl-Shift-B. Send it below the bump and using the node tool adjust it to make the curves. You may need to reposition the shadow shape and adjust some things here. Repeat the same steps with the other side. Draw the shape, paste the style, and send it below the bump. Then adjust the nodes. It's looking good, but I will move some things around. Okay, but now I think some slightly more intense highlights would look even better. So grab the pen tool and draw a narrow shape on the front. Give it this color. Send it below the face shapes. And curve it with the node tool. Now draw a few other repeating the same steps as before. I think some slightly darker shadow at the bottom would look really good, like a harder contact shadow. But we need to do something first so it's easier to draw. Group all the shapes of the pumpkin once again. We're gonna use this shape to make a clip. Great, now to make the shadow. Grab the pen tool. This time we'll just make a single shape. Make the spikes following the bumps. Copy a shadow shape and paste the style with Ctrl-Shift-B. Now it's time to make the curves. But here's the problem. The shadow is technically a clip, so if when you go to edit it, you get something like this, you need to disable some of the displaying options in the tool controls of the node tool. Just toggle off these two buttons here. Now it's easier to go in and adjust the path. And as a bit of an extra, I want to add some shadow here at the bottom of the stem. Just make this shape with the pen tool. Duplicate the stem and perform a Boolean intersection to remove the excess. You can copy the shadow in the stem to paste the style in the new shadow. Don't forget to send it below everything, but above the stem shape. We're almost done with the illustration. All that's left now is a couple of details and maybe some refining here and there. Let's begin with the drop shadow. Grab the ellipse tool and draw an ellipse at the bottom. Make sure it's scaled vertically so the pumpkin reads as it is in the correct perspective. Paste the style of the shadow and send it below the pumpkin. And adjust more if you need it. I want another smaller shadow that works a bit more like a contact shadow on the floor. Just duplicate it with Ctrl-D and scale it with the object tool's arrows. I want it to be a bit darker so you could make the alpha slider go a bit to the right to make it more opaque, but that's up to you. One thing I would like to do is to make the lines a bit less noticeable. I just don't want it to be full black. Now, going in and selecting all the shapes one by one is a bit of a pain. Luckily, there is a nice little feature of the program that allows you to select all shapes with a particular style. First, select any shape that has a black stroke. Then go to Edit, select Same, Stroke Color. This will select all the shapes that have a black stroke. Let's change the color. Switch to the dropper tool, then shift-click on the orange of the pumpkin. When you shift-click, you apply the color to the stroke instead of the fill. This means that all the shapes have the same stroke color as the fill of the pumpkin, making it almost unnoticeable. I don't want that. I want a noticeable stroke. So go to the Fill and Stroke dialog, to the Stroke tab, and go to the L slider. Move it a bit down. Not enough to be full black, but enough to be noticeable. And now I like it much more. If you want, you can change the color of the stroke of the stem, which is a bit darker, and orange may not fit it well, but if you want, you can leave it as it is. Okay, now for the final details, before we move on to refining some things. This pumpkin has a bit less of a cartoony rendering and more of an illustration one, so I think some gradients over the whole thing would give it something extra. To do this, we need a shape that matches the silhouette of the pumpkin. We cannot use a duplicate of it, because there are a lot of shapes with different degrees of opacity, and that messes up the whole gradient. Instead, grab the pumpkin shape and separate it from the drop shadows we made a while ago. You'll see why in a minute. Now grab the bucket tool. We're gonna use it to get the shape of the silhouette. So make sure here in the tool controls, the Fill By dropdown is set to alpha. This is important. Now zoom in as much as possible on the pumpkin. This is also important. The bucket tool generates a shape based on the size in the canvas. And click anywhere inside of it. And you should get a single shape with the exact silhouette of the pumpkin. Now switch to the gradient tool and make a gradient that goes from the top to the bottom. To the top stop, give it some hard color like pure red, and make sure the opacity slider is set to about 20 to 30. We don't want it to be fully opaque. Also make sure the other stop is completely transparent, that the A slider is set to 0. Another detail, you may want to try different blend modes here with this drop-down. I tried a few, but I settled with overlay, which didn't do too much. So don't worry too much about what you see here. They don't matter in the final result. I'll just mention it because it shows up in the dialogue and I didn't want you to get confused with it. Anyway, make sure this gradient shape is below the face shapes, so the gradient color won't dull the light. The illustration is basically done. I decided to spend some time adjusting a few things, not that much. All of these changes are things that are particular to my drawing and what I like and dislike about it. Chances are that your drawing will have completely different things that you feel could use a retouch, so this part will most likely not apply to your drawing completely. I played around with the color of the gradient until I decided for the original pure red. Most importantly, I decided to keep adjusting the shape with the envelope path effect we used at the beginning, and I like the end result much more than the original. I also decided to make the shadows darker by changing the alpha. And at some moment I lost the shadow at the bottom, I'm not sure when. I think it was on a crash that I edited out, so I had to redo it. And that's it, we are finally done with the jack-o'-lantern. So congratulations if you managed to get to here. I hope you learned something, or at least that you had fun with the project. My goal with this illustration was to show a bit more of a loose method of working, where you have to improvise a bit more if you want to follow along. You'll notice that I didn't add my usual grid, and I didn't even mention proportions. I think that illustration with vectors requires a lot of editing and adjusting and improvising, and I think this illustration shows up that aspect pretty well. So remember that this tutorial is part of a series of step-by-step tutorials for beginners. Check out the description for the full playlist. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more step-by-step tutorials and other content on Inkscape and illustration. Also, Likes and comments will really help me and encourage me to keep making videos. Making this type of scripted tutorial requires a lot of time and work. That was all for now. See you next video. Bye!